Good morning, artists in Alaska, and good evening, artists in Russia. And welcome to the seminar number 2 of our seminar series. And this event is devoted to the story which was surprising for many people in the north of Russia, especially those who are from Arkhangelsk, such as, yes, me included. In 2016, we had the first Arctic Art Forum in Arkhangelsk in September. And we were so lucky to have Aaron from Anchorage Museum visiting us and having a presentation about the museum, and about the collections and the way you work in Anchorage, which was very inspiring for the visitors of the forum. And that's where we started to talk about this story of the New Arkhangelsk. Like we told before, many of us who work with the production of the forum have a background in humanities and history, but no one has ever heard about this story before. So that's why we took an initiative to have this topic today, and connected to the current discussion devoted to memory, power, storytelling. How do we create stories as artists? What kind of form we can use for creating new stories, which could be alternative to the well-known stories we have learned through the educational system that the educational system provided to us. It would be really exciting to compare how the history was presented to the artists in Alaska and in Russia, and how do the artists work with it today. So the framework, we suggest to develop the framework of this event around these themes: memory, monuments, microhistories, storytelling, and especially visual storytelling, and unlearning. All these 5 themes are very relevant, and especially for this very case. And there are several questions we would like to go through. And one of them is about the educational system and educational processes and how they create the collective memory, because these are some of the maybe more general questions, how we can try to introduce this topic. And it would be interesting to start with artists from Alaska, actually. Have you ever learned about Arkhangelsk, or have you ever heard about other connections to Russia than just what is provided by the media? Because that's what we also discussed when we were working with the project, that there is an information vacuum. We do not really know that much. And the goal of this series of the seminars is getting acquainted and just learn more about what we are doing. So I would love to address the question about your educational system and how did you learn history in your schools in Alaska, and what did you know from your school, which you used in your practice or had to unlearn? Maybe we could start with Anna Hoover. I see that Sonya is also here.
Доброе утро, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you. You know, I didn't go to school as a child in Alaska, so seems like there's more apparent connection between the two. I was in Washington State going to school, so there was very little education, I suppose, directly about Russian involvement. Of course, we all knew that America had purchased Alaska, from Russia. But other than that, there's very little. But now living up here since 2013, you know, it's just, we're dripping with Russian names and all, you know, it's very rich in Russian history.
Okay, thank you. And we have Nicholas. Thank you very much. We have also Nicholas, who actually grew up in Sitka, right? And all the history is, of course, fairly challenging. And when we were preparing the seminar, we got many questions from the artists as well, like about the political story and stuff. But we told, we also try to concentrate on the cultural background of the history, because yeah, we can also discuss how much of responsibility can be taken and stuff. But it would be just interesting to learn about your background of growing up in Sitka and your history lessons, and how it influenced your practice today.
Good morning. Yeah, I was born here in Sitka, but I've lived all over. We're isolated on an island community. A lot of our history, though, that we're given as children is standardized education, which is generally highly insufficient and one-sided. The cultural history that we hold in our own communities is generally really rich, and I come from culture of oral history, so you know, we obviously have our oral culture that still continues today, and of course furthering research that those in our fields continue to do is a huge part of my practice, I suppose, is just understanding those aspects of history and our stories from our communities and giving those voice. So Sitka also is unique from other communities in Alaska, where we, one of the large holidays that's celebrated here still, and I think it's one of the only communities that celebrates it really in a very colonial format, is Alaska Day, which is signifying that transfer of unceded indigenous land from Russia to the US government. So
thank you very much.
thank you.
Sonya, could you comment on that as well, about the education? Did you grow up in that very place, and what kind of regional component was there in the educational system which you could use today in your practice, or was there any at all? You can just unmute. I think you should switch on your microphone.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So similar to Nicholas, I grew up in a town that was landlocked, a community called Nome, which is a gold rush city. But before that, our people were there. So there's this kind of weird, as a child, I grew up with the history of Western history, where we studied what was relevant in Alaska at that time was mostly ideas of extraction, and Alaska was mainly became a part of the United States to take things from resources. So that's all the major timelines within my education upbringing in the school system. All that history was really connected to colonialist ideas of taking, and especially in Nome, that, you know, and I'm sure that Nick and Anna could talk more about harvesting of furs and all of those things. It was about taking things from the land and bringing them somewhere else, and being a part of this property commodification, if you will. And when I was in high school, I remember distinctly my friend Diane's dad was a historian, and he looked at the book we were reading, our Alaska history, and it was from 1949. It was crazy. So this was probably the same book that my dad learned from and generations before him. And the depiction of Indigenous people was so disgraceful. And I think that seriously, this is all the issues we have today stem from this educational system of perpetuating the stereotype of Indigenous people and creating more division, and that's
how is this? Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's
definitely
so
the work that I do today, for sure.
Mm-hmm. How did the situation change now? Because many of the facts you are describing, it's you can say the same about the north of Russia. That is, we have just published a book where many participants are saying exactly the same, because the area was, especially in the Soviet time, was more meant as a resources, like natural resource. And actually, I don't think it really has changed that much. So, what about the education or school education? Do you have more of the regional component where the identity of the people living in the north can actually be formed by the place as well?
Well, I think, like, if we're talking about the way that I grew up, which is, I graduated high school in 1987. So I think nowadays it's probably much better, but I think part of the problem is that there isn't like an overall arching curriculum. Every single school district has control over the curriculum that's taught. I think in Alaska, they've added like an Alaska Native history component to maybe high school. I actually feel like as a child, I was enriched because we had, we didn't have any Native teachers until I was probably in like 5th grade. We had a Native teacher, Alaska Native teacher, who was from our region. Otherwise, we had aides who talked about, I'm interested in this kind of idea of, the true history of the North and of the United States and of everywhere, because I feel like if we knew the true history, then all of these barriers would be diminished. I was going to put it in one of my screen shares. I don't know how to screen share, but this image that was on Fox News about at the Trump rally the other day that just was so disturbing. It was like, we're coming for the Blacks and the Indians first. It's a new world order. It was it's the same thing we're talking about right now. But this idea of North, we grew up there, so I had a strong family, kind of active family that was talking about who we are and where we're from. And I think Anna and Nick probably had the same thing. So we were able to, try to make sense of that, balance that out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we can just go to our Russian participants, because we have Ustina Yakovleva, who is actually now in the US, right? Are you? Yeah, she's on the residency in the USA, but you also have a story of your own artistic path where you were working with rediscovering your own heritage. Could you please describe it and tell more about how do you do it through your art?
Yes, so I was born in Moscow actually, and we didn't have any connection to the North in the classes much, but I know now my grandmother and my uncles and my cousins are living in Syktyvkar in Komi Republic, and they study actually, it's a main program to study the language, Komi language, and they study all these things, and I think it's good. So for me, it was like, when I became 20 years old, I felt like lost, and I wanted to get to know more of my family history. And I went with all my grandmamas to the north of Russia, to Ust-Tsilma, to Sinigorye, and it was really a strong impression. And I felt like real life is happening there, that you don't need to go to the plastic shop to buy plastic food, and man is a man, woman is a woman. And it was so beautiful, with a lot of tradition and crafts and nature. And I think it's like just growing and growing through me from each year. Like I felt rooted at the moment, and I'm still coming back there. And it looks like maybe even I will have also an exhibition in Syktyvkar in the gallery. They invited me next September. So I want to make a video also with my grandmama and mama making something together, because we all making this handcrafted pieces, but really different way. And one of the beautiful things that my mama didn't know also, kind of where she got this inspiration of making patchwork quilt. And then she went later without me to the house of my great grandmother, Ustina, also her name. And she found this little bag which she made with her hands with little patches, and then she just took it home as an artifact from this family memory. And yeah, I don't know, should I show Katya slides or something?
I think you can just show slides right away, because we don't need to wait. We have actually rather limited time, so you can just show
I will
them.
try to share. I'm not so good with this, all the
yes, I have to allow it now, so it's allowed, please.
I don't see this share screen thing. It's photos.
At the very bottom is a green share screen.
Yeah, I have iCloud Drive. Okay, I'll try photos, but I think maybe it's not. No, it's not here. Sorry. Because I had before this share screen and there was more. I can just maybe send the link on the presentation. So now, since I met also Katya and she invited me to Arctic Art Forum, and I felt like it's such a beautiful thing to go there to Arkhangelsk to see it with my own eyes, because my great grandmother was once there and she was really impressed, and I wanted to kind of, since I have the same name and the same interest as her, I wanted to go there and we could make an exhibition. And it was a beautiful experience to meet the people and have this feedback from them, because really I'm like a girl from Moscow, kind of not really living in the north, coming there, but I realized that it was touchy for them, and they really were up to it. And they were going also to another exhibition we were doing then in Museum of Arctic, and we went to the residency in Chakala in the village with Uliana, and Katya Anna Zlotka was inviting us, and we still want to continue to work on it. And yeah, I started to document the practices with this daily routine, which we always have in the women's daily practice, like making a thread or making embroidery, or when you just repeatedly making all this daily routine. And I'm really fond of it, to pay attention to it and just show it to people around, that it's beautiful, but it's like never ending, and it's about the process, and it's good to be conscious in it. Yeah, and I'm really fond of real stories of people who were meeting old ladies who are living in the village, talking with them, making field recordings of their stories, and it's always really touchy and strong. And there was not much voice before. Also, as my grandmama, she's not really telling all the stories, like creepy stories from the childhood, like how all the she was going from school, so they needed to go by the boat through the river, and it was already like ice standing there, and and so on the one boat she was with her sister, and another boat, the whole boat was with like 20 kids, fell down like under the water, and they all died. and it was like a daily routine of hers. And it's really impressive how what kids had to see all these complications. So I'm like trying to explore things, listen to people, and like a sponge collect information, and then something appearing. And also it's often much more abstract images which I'm creating. It's just full of this information, but kind of coded in different ways somehow with the visual language. Yeah, I will send a link. I'll try to send a link of the presentation I was preparing because I couldn't open it now. Sorry.
Yeah, I just shared some of your some of the last works from the residency, because one of the discoveries that we had as well was that in around this area of Sitka, there are still people living and speaking the ancient dialect from the 19th century, from that very area where we have been traveling and having the residency. So it was another completely amazing story to learn. Yes, thank you. I think Sergey, would you like to say something? You're sitting in Cosmos, but maybe you can say something about your history. You are now in Arkhangelsk.
Yes,
right?
Hi people. My name is Sergey Garitsov. I am a visual artist, musician from Arkhangelsk. I created art about 30 years in Arkhangelsk, in Scandinavian, in Moscow, in other countries. Basically, I make video installation and noise music. No example, I have a project Sounds Weaver. Example, I take folk patterns, and turn these patterns for special application in sound, make samples, and make something atmospheric noise. Invited musician from Arkhangelsk, folk musician. It's folk singers and guitar and flute and other instrument, drummers, and make a big presentation, maybe. Okay, I sent now. Как тут послать-то тут? Ссылку-то как самое
Смотри,
скинуть?
внизу можешь нажать Share
Чат.
Screen. Ну, чат.
Я в чате скину эту ссылку. Момент.
На видео, окей. So you
вот,
want
все,
to send
вижу. Окей. Так, it's video, this project. You can see. And for me, it is a very interesting project. Все, наверное.
Yeah, maybe I can just also comment a little bit, because when we started to work with the forum, we were so focused on the local histories, on the micro histories, and Sergey came with this suggestion of collaboration between weavers, because there is a large weaver school and craft school in Arkhangelsk, where many patterns are being like learned anew in several generations. So he invited people from the school, the teacher and the students. And here in the link that he sent in the chat, you can just take a look what he did. So basically, the Sounds Weaver project was about connecting the music, the electronic music, with the weaving process, and the textile textilny станок, the textile machine, you can say. It's like this manufacturing machine from the 19th century. It was also included in the sound production. So it was doing a kind of a drum. And he sent now a link where, well, you can see this like imaginary that he developed, because of course this reality was gone during the Soviet industrialization, which took place in the 30s in the north of Russia. So this everyday life, it was a part of the everyday life of the people living there, of the peasants, of the of the old believers maybe as well, but many of I mean, this everyday practices, they were gone, and the interest in Russia is enormous now to this pre-Soviet, pre-industrial production processes for arts and crafts. So okay. Yes, thank you, Sergey. I see that Nikolai is also there, but I wonder if he can join, because Nikolai, are you here? Because I don't see that he can. There is something happening there. Okay. Anyway, so I think we can just go further to the next questions. If anyone has any comments or has anything to say, please do. And we just go to the next question, which is devoted to the topic of sculpture and monuments, which is
yes.
Excuse
me.
Sure.
I would like to just interject, maybe giving a little bit of credit to today's education in Alaska and those educators who are presenting.
Could you please switch on the video so we can see and maybe present yourself?
Okay. Yeah, to those, I would like to give a little bit of credit to those educators of today in Alaska who are working very hard to present Alaska history a little bit more objectively. So I can say that my kids were in Alaska schools very recently, and several years ago when my kid was in 3rd grade, they had a huge unit in social studies that was devoted to Alaskan cultures, and they studied this topic very intensely then at the 3rd grade level. Of course, in high school they repeated in depth, but also it was interesting because at least that teacher in Girdwood, where I lived, was trying to really present the colonial history more objectively as well. She was reflecting on her own previous education, and she was trying, well, as a child in Alaska, right? And she was trying to correct those mistakes that were made before to make sure that she is not repeating them in her classroom, to the point that being a member of the Russian American community, Russian Alaskan community that I am, my son, one night, he was crying and before going to bed. And I asked him what was going on, and he said, well, you know what? Our teacher says that everything that Russians did in Alaska was so bad. And being a Russian, I feel so terrible about it. So they were reflecting on that history in class. And we had a discussion with my son that day and the next subsequent days to make sure that we balance out that information that had been presented in his class, and we had a conversation with the teacher and everything. So, but I would say that there is things going on right now in education that I think are doing good things and presenting a history a lot better than it was done 30, 40, 50 and more years ago. So yeah, so a bit of that.
Ekaterina, would you like me to talk about monuments a little bit?
Yes, I just want to say a little comment. I think because this story is so complex, and I just wanted to add something which I think is very important, because at the moment I'm in Norway myself, and I think many narratives are created by the media. So when we work with the cultural projects, we rather often face the power of the media, which creates a dominating picture. And in this picture, culture and education is not really always present, despite the fact that there can be hundreds of people involved in cultural diplomacy, educational projects. It's not them which are represented in the media, right? So I think this is also interesting thing to talk about, because when we are discussing what is Russia, because you have 140 million people living there, and each of them, they have their different jobs. So I think it's a very complex and interesting questions, but I think our field is culture, and that's what we can do. We can establish meeting places, we can discuss who we are and try to understand ourselves who we are. But I think Marek had exciting comments, because at this very moment he's working with the monuments, and you also have a background from as a sculptor. So could you please say some words about what you're thinking about the current processes in the US and also in the USSR, where we had many facts of iconoclasm?
I am, hello everybody. I'm not going to talk about myself. Actually, I am in a sculpture studio at university, and my students are working on a project which kind of relates to the idea of the monument. But I would like to kind of bring a topic from conversation. I think it's very exciting to talk about monuments among Russian and American artists for a number of reasons. One of them is looking from Russian perspective. I don't think there's any other nation in the world which in 20th century was able to actually, after Russian Revolution, destroy a lot of monuments, and then after that build a lot of them, not only in Russia, but also built all over the world. I mean, Soviet Union was really in love in building monuments. I don't need to tell you which ones. And then also in 20th century, you went through the process of taking them down after Gorbachev. And then I understand that some of them were also reestablished again in 90s. So this process of kind of monument iconoclasm is pretty much ongoing, and you probably have a lot of information and a lot of observation and knowledge and experience and opinion about that. On the other hand, looking at from Americans' perspective, obviously the recent events of the Black Lives Matter brought the idea of the reevaluating monuments to the very forefront of cultural conversation. Although it looks to me that actually this happened before. It's actually happened probably around 2015 with the toppling of the Cecil Rhodes monuments in South Africa. I have to bring South Africa when we talk about Russia and United States. And the whole conversation about Cecil Rhodes, which is kind of, he's very difficult obviously to defend. In result of that, South Africa went for a process of mostly adding new monuments to describe the history through different lights. So I would be interested in kind of question or your opinion about different form of iconoclasm. So completely removing and destroying the monuments, removing them to new location. Actually, there is a very interesting story about Queen Victoria being removed from Dublin, Ireland to Sydney, or adding additional sculptures or adding additional information, contextualize the monuments itself. But that's kind of one topic. And also on the top of that, I would love to, maybe some of you might actually talk about it as well, is the word itself. A monument in English have a Greek and Latin roots, and means to remind, to advise, and also to warn. In Russian, pamyatnik means it got Slavic roots, which means to remember mostly. So that would be also kind of interesting for me and all of us to hear your opinion about the meaning and the future of the monuments, which kind of touch to the idea. Well, how do you see your role in addressing those issues?
Whom do you want? I think maybe you can just address whom you want to ask directly.
I mean, anybody, it's open forum, so I'm not going to pull out anybody to chalkboard.
Maybe Nicholas could show his images.
Right.
Did you bring some, Nicholas?
let me get my screen share going. Can you see that?
Yep.
Oh, good. Excuse me. So this is recent work created for the Biennale of Sydney. Shadow on the Land, an excavation and bush burial. I was researching and down in Australia for the Biennale maybe a year before installation. During that time, I got to visit the Kiwi Islands and meet with other Aboriginal artists and communities. The Kiwi Islands are located north, kind of very far north in Australia near Papua New Guinea, and is actually the site. I got to visit the actual site of a first European ship landing, opposed to the narrative that's upheld in Australia of Cook, quote unquote, discovering Australia. In Sydney, if you've been to the city in Hyde Park, there's a Cook statue, and on the Cook statue is a discovery plaque. So, you know, it's this misrepresentation of history, and it's this, it upholds the settler colonial narrative of erasure of indigenous communities, erasure of indigenous histories, and it's a contested site still. So knowing that the 250th anniversary was coming up, which was earlier this year, of Cook's landing, meant that there would be a great deal of celebration, colonial celebration, much like in the US with some of our holidays, much like the Alaska Day narrative in my community, which until recent times largely ignored indigenous perspectives or even communities. So I wanted to create a piece that dove into these conversations. Shadow on the Land, an excavation and bush burial is the work that was created. Originally, the concept was to excavate the shadow of the monument or statue in Hyde Park of Cook. We couldn't get city approval to do that, so we moved the work to a different site, which I think worked in favor for the piece, mainly because it allowed for a conversation of this to happen without the monument, which I would say is a future that's imagined and demonstrated, where we get to continue these conversations without necessarily having the object there, or the statue or the monument. The archaeological excavation of the shadow and work was intended to dig deep enough to bury the statue and the monument. In the process of burying that statue on Aboriginal soil, when you dig down, you will, in theory, find several examples of existing communities and histories, especially in one of the oldest civilizations on Earth that we know of, scientifically speaking. So I wanted to use archaeology as a focus, archaeology largely, and as a process and medium for this piece. Archaeology has largely upheld white supremacist narratives, historically speaking, and how indigenous communities are romanticized, are contained in the past. And then through that process, I also wanted to know, and I couldn't have predicted this at the time of the building of the work, though it's an old conversation in our communities. It's a new conversation to a wider audience and a global audience, I suppose, that became international in a sense, where a lot of these symbols and figures became sites of protest or places and spaces to show up and voice other perspectives that aren't represented by these monuments or statues or figures. So these are scenes. This was in Australia and Sydney, and this was the law enforcement protecting said statue during times of anti-police brutality protests, Black Lives Matters protests. And so these barriers obviously on this site represent a few things. One is that they represent these barriers put up by those that uphold these symbols and images and narratives. And then it's also, work site barrier of sorts. The reference in the title of this work, An Excavation and Bush Burial, the bush burial is also a reference to a romanticized landscape painting, and I don't have an image of that here to share with you, but bush burial was a painting, a European landscape painting that's now in one of the national galleries in Australia, or one of the museums. I don't remember which one at the moment, but it depicted a romanticized version of the first white settler body being buried on Australian Aboriginal land. And that was a form of placing that romantic view and body, injecting it into the land literally and into the history, all the while refusing to acknowledge Aboriginal communities and connections to that, deep connections to that place where these Aboriginal communities are often viewed and perceived as fauna. And that perception happened here in the US as well in forms, and that same intended perception was purposefully done to excuse the atrocities or the violence that happened to Indigenous bodies, land, to make way for colonization. If people are deemed less than human, then the community that's inflicting that violence will be much less accused by their gods in that process, I suppose. So, and that rhetoric is still echoed today, even in our political climate, where the current president refers to women and children as animals south of the border here in the US. So
this is a great work, especially in Australia, where there were still cases in 1960s of hunting and killing Aboriginal people in Queensland, well documented actual hunting expeditions to do that. It's difficult to believe, kind of our lifetime almost.
Yeah, this is, colonization still continues, and it's still continued in various forms. The violence that might have appeared as bounties and paychecks towards Indigenous communities for their scalps or for removing them from the land has transferred, and now it surfaces today in society through statistics. Indigenous people are in the US are of the highest percentage of being extrajudicially murdered by law enforcement in this country. So these are, versions of that violence that take shape in new forms today. And yes, in the 60s, I want to share another image if I can find it. I don't know. This was a recent totem that I was the lead carver on in Juneau, Alaska. And this project came to and was put up to as a healing pole for the community. In the 60s, the Tlingit village was intentionally burnt down to remove the community, to remove the homes and the families, to make way for a boat harbor, which is a recent version of nation building and a recent version of colonization that had happened and continues on a well, you know, an international global scale, but also here in the US. So.
Any maybe response from Russian artists who have examples or stories about reevaluating history through kind of visual public representation of history and a kind of official version of the history and the history which is not told, or it's the misinterpretation of actual facts, especially in the light of, like I said, the kind of main transition over the last century, before revolution, after revolution, and then new democracy, and then the new state, which I don't know if we call it democracy, but.
Well, I think we have. I can just comment on that, because we don't really have that many monuments and contemporary artists working with the monuments now in Arkhangelsk. And the artists which are present here, they work with identity. So both Sergey and Ustina, they work with their own history and reconstructing own history. But if we go back to the history of Arkhangelsk, we can actually face the similar stories, because Arkhangelsk appeared at the world map because of the similar reasons why Cook or like Columbus went to America. There was this exciting story about Richard Chancellor, who was looking for a way to China, as far as I remember. But he stopped next to the place where Severodvinsk is now, and it was basically a colonial traveling. So the start of the town of Arkhangelsk started because of this fact, of this travel, and everything which was happening afterwards could also be connected or seen through the lens of the colonial history. But if we're talking about sculpture, there is a very interesting story about Soviet, the case of USSR, which it's so unique in terms of like, because the ideology and history education and architecture, design, and everyday life, it's like this this complex reality of the USSR has also influenced how we create arts and sculpture. And for instance, like that's what we told before. In the very middle of the town, you have this monument. It was the last monument created by a Moscow sculptor, Lev Kerbel, in 1989, and it is still there. So the monument is still there, and there are people who are who want this monument to be there, because there were many voices. But I think it's yeah, these monuments, they are kind of like a rest of the USSR, because now no one constructs the monuments of Lenin anymore. But and maybe the sculptors or the artists, they are not even alive anymore, or they are very old, but the monument is still there. And I think it's also important just to see. And like the Lenin Square, in the middle of the town, it was built on the place of the wooden housing, because Arkhangelsk was a wooden town, but a lot of these houses, they were just like destroyed by the architects in the 70s. and they were building this square. So you can also say that the ideology and this like idea of progress has destroyed a lot of the local heritage. But yeah, if we're talking about the monument, I think now we are having the artists who are creating more soft works, because there are not so many who actually work with the monuments as such. Yeah, but at least we can see that the colonial history of Alaska, and if we're talking about the northern Russia, we have really many similar stories where the narratives of the center, they were dominating, and now generations of the artists, they are recreating their own history. Yeah. Yeah, I have some more questions. What did you learn in your academy that you had to unlearn? And I think this question maybe is connected to the first one in a way, but it would be really great to see more pictures from Sonya and from Anna, maybe. Because we have been at the webpage of Sonya and Anna, and there are lots of different works. Maybe you could just comment how you show the intergenerational family knowledge in your works today. It would be really nice if you can show some of the works and maybe comment if there is a possibility for that.
I'm not sure this is Sonya, how to share. I just put them on my desktop, and how do I do it? Do you guys?
You just because I just down on this like Zoom thing, you have a kind of
Share
share
screen.
screen. Yeah, so you just press on that and then you share the screen of yours.
Okay, I guess I have to open up something, huh? Let me see, what was I going to talk about in this section? I guess I'll just show a couple pictures here.
Mm-hmm.
Do I drag it in? I don't know.
Sonia, you just click on the window you want to share. It should change the color to blue.
I opened it up and a second.
And then share it. At the very bottom right, you have a, so when you pick perfect, you got it.
There we go.
This is called Mark, Polar Bear and Walrus. And I guess, you know, the way I grew up was, I both have a Western education through the university, and also growing up, you know, working with my hands with my mom and my aunt and my sister. So a lot of the work that I do is definitely influenced from a cultural background and this idea. I loved Ustina's comments about working with your hands, because that's something that's really important to me. And it isn't always about this kind of fine art, and I put that in quotations because I don't find a separation between the smaller, more what people consider craft and fine art. I think that they belong together, that they meld and influence each other. So yeah, so this piece is in the Anchorage Museum collection. A number of these works are that I'm sharing. It's polar bear fur and acrylic polymer, obviously the American flag. A lot of the content also comes from, you know, this place of talking about indigenous kind of rights and the erasure and assimilation of indigenous peoples into these dominant Western white countries and culture kind of places. So let me see if I can put that one down and do another one. Let's see. Okay. This is a piece that I made for an exhibition in Svalbard. The Northern Norway Museum invited me to have an exhibition there. It's traveling around right now in a show called Hearts of Our People, which originated at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. It's a piece from a series I've been doing for quite some time. It's about it's called Idiot Strings, the things we carry. And it's a commentary about the disproportionate number of Native Americans, Alaska Natives who take their life, who die by their own hand. And so it's a large scale installation, and each piece is human scale, and they all overlap through the shadow and movement. And the idea is that one life is not just one life that impacts many. They overlap and touch each other. And I don't know a single person in our circle who hasn't been affected by this idea, this tragic act. And I guess it's ongoing. I've made numerous iterations of this, both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional, and also invited the audience to participate through a number of different types of installation. And obviously this piece is rawhide. It's reindeer and sheep rawhide. It's hand stitched. The wool is twined, and inserted within it is a metal wire to make it stiff. So some techniques that would have been, learned, and also using more contemporary materials as well. Maybe that's enough, you think, Katerina? And let Anna talk.
Thank you very much, because of course there is a lot of information at the webpage, but when you comment, it opens up from a completely different. It's of course much more personal, it's much more illustrative, and thank you very much.
Say one thing about my experience at the university and education, because something that I didn't realize until I went away to college was that I think that what really infuriates me sometimes is that people don't take the knowledge that is learned not in Western ways. And so I think that that is something that's really important to kind of talk about, is the way that people learn and who they learn it from, and how a lot of times it's dismissed and not valid. That's something that I definitely learned when I went away and I came back, because this other knowledge that I had, I didn't really pay attention to when I was, when I was young. It wasn't important. And that's the knowledge that has fed my soul and helped me to do the things that I do.
Mm-hmm. I just need to say this because it's of course during the Arctic Art Forum we also had the symposium which took place in October, where we tried to discuss the colonization in Russia, because this topic it just becomes a part of the agenda because it's much more complex than or you have both like Western colonization, but you also have the internal colonization inside the country, and where the center of power is not really in the north necessarily, but we're still in the process to find the right language and to develop this language, because it has been not existing. And art history is such about the north of Russia, about the Arctic, has not been really existing. So we are trying to to create it. We are trying to find the right language, and this seminar series is also part of it. Yes, and we have Anna. Anna, could you please share your works and comment on the intergenerational knowledge and in your art?
Sure, thanks. you know, Sonya's last piece, the idiot strings, segues well. For me, when I moved to Alaska, I've always spent my summers up here, but spending more time in Anchorage, I was asking everyone, you know, wow, where's the monument for Alaska Native people that have been lost through, you know, I don't know, wars and disease and, you know, more currently just hardship or whatever. And I was asking our medical facilities and leaders everywhere, just, you know, wow, how is it that we don't have our own monument, you know? And I was trying to envision what that could look like, and you know, you could put out a call to people to try and design it. And but anyway, that I haven't got that checked off my list yet, but I was able to make a film, and I don't know screen sharing either. I could try and figure it out, but it'll take a minute. But this film is called The Last Walk, and it's a short film. It's 15 minutes fiction. But for me, it was very important because it touches on a family who's affected by suicide, and it shows this family continuing their life. And so many of our community members are doing just that. They are, you know, continuing life with carrying some tragedy and memory, and but also, you know, there's beauty, there's still beauty in life, and purpose, and so in a way, this little short film is a bit of a monument, I suppose, for me to share with my community. Whoa, I'm trying to.
Do you have a link to the film? I think maybe we will not share the video, but we can also gather this link, collect all of them, and just send it in a common mail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes. So Marek had to leave us to his students. They are working with a new monument to whoever. Do you have more examples, Anna? Thank you.
Thank you. So my other one is my region of Alaska is still, we have very healthy waters, and salmon are abundant, and our commercial fishery sustains the region economically. And we have foreign mining interests working very diligently for the last 15 years to put North America's largest open pit mine at the headwaters of our streams. And so I really wanted to raise awareness about this controversy. Mm-hmm. And so I designed a t-shirt, which seems simple, but this shirt says No Pebble Mine, but it has interesting artwork on it. And so for me, people who attended the exhibit when it was an exhibit had the opportunity to educate themselves, and then be a walking billboard for sharing that knowledge, and you know, hopefully protecting the salmon and stopping this mine. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, do we have any questions from because we have some other participants here as well, and I see Javier is here, and I see Alexander Baranov. Nikolai Gernet has some technical problems, I think, and he's not now online. I sent him a message, but I think we have rather limited time today, and I think that we'll just go to the next and the last question. which is about stories. And before we go to that, I think I just would like to also show some art historical examples about the North, because like we told before, we are trying to formulate certain language of what has been happening in the North. And the national romanticism in Russia has been created by several artists who traveled to the north of Russia and collected a lot of, who gathered inspiration there. And created lots of different works in the beginning of the 20th century, but this was mostly the artists from the centers. So they were traveling, they were getting the inspiration, and they were going back, and they were created it in Moscow. So you didn't really hear the voices from the north. So people living in the north accuse that they are being talked about. They don't really have a platform for saying anything. Even now about the Arctic, it's mostly people in the center who are talking about that. So one of the ideas with starting the forum was about having a platform for gathering people who live in the north who can talk about themselves. Yes. Well, thank you very much for fantastic works. Very challenging, but many questions are recognizable for many artists, I think. Do we have any more comments? Ustina, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I'm just really sad that I couldn't show my pictures, but I'm really fond of watching your images. It's really good to show works, and I'm really impressed by Sonya installation. I even wrote her in the chat. Yeah, thank you for showing. And I would love to see Anna's film actually, because it sounds really interesting. Yeah, I think it's super important to meet and talk. It's really nice, and thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sergey, do you want to comment on this work that you have seen? Sergey works with video mostly and with sound, so I think he's more.
Так, что еще раз пропустил? Извини.
Ты хочешь покомментировать насчет последних работ, о которых рассказывали?
No comments. I just look and я просто смотрю и изучаю пока.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sergey needs more time to give his comment. Okay.
Okay. Alexander Menukhov can speak about your project. Example, скульптуры, installation. И, если говорить что-то про это, то, что я видел, то это, возможно, где-то в этой области Саша может что-то сказать.
Okay, we are having an artist who actually does some sculpture, and maybe he can also comment on that. Alexander, he was with us last time. If he wants to say anything, I will ask him here.
Он, наверное, не слышит. А вот, есть, появился.
Нет, мне все понравилось, классные объекты.
Maybe you can say it in. You want to say it in Russian or in English?
Ну, по-английски мне сложно будет.
Ну, скажи там, I like all.
I very like all work. It's very interesting for me. It's now I do work with them, with colonization, decolonization. It's interesting for me. I have some works about with them.
Maybe I can show Sasha. I think actually, we should just send your work, Drakar, right? Because you also.
А ты показать его сможешь, Саш? Сейчас
Я на
фотографию
Кате
покажу.
покажу, да? Или мне показать?
Ну, ты поищи тоже у себя, у тебя где-то была эта фотография. Просто фотографию покажи.
Well, yes, Alexander is was actually. I'll just send the link now because. Саша, ты можешь по-русски сказать, я переведу, если хочешь. Ты у нас за Гернета будешь сегодня. Гернет куда-то делся непонятно куда.
Что мне сделать надо? Презентацию показать или что?
Ну, а у тебя есть фотография Дракара? Расшарить ее?
Да, я сейчас найду.
Okay, so we just sent a link to the Drakkar. You can just click on the link and you have the picture of this Drakkar, and Alexander will comment on this work, which is created, it's not created in Russia, it's created in Norway, in the town of Vardø, which is also rather interesting and challenging town because of the lots of political stuff as well. There is a NATO base there, but the people from the Russian part, they're coming and making this work, which refers to the Viking history and the history of the Norse. So Alexander just wanted to present this work. He was not in the program, but I think it's nice if you also say something about that. Which year did you create this work? Саш, я думаю, давай ты сейчас прямо расскажешь, у нас времени просто очень мало. Я думаю, что все уже открыли эту ссылку.
Угу. Историю рассказать, да, или что? Ну, во-первых, это сам остров по себе, там интересный последний объект Луизы Буржуа стоит, и одного шведского скульптора. И это место было выбрано, ну, оно как бы частное получается, но оно в плане интересно, то, что оно как раз находится в проливе между островом и материком. И этот пролив назван по имени большого дракара, ну, главного дракара, который во главе плывет всей этой регаты.
Yeah, so Alexander Baranov created this large sculpture in the town of Vardø, and it was just created for several years ago. And in this town, you have a sculpture of Louise Bourgeois, and they decided to create a wooden sculpture which can refer to the local history and the history of communication between northern Russia and northern Norway, which was back at the time before USSR.
И это как раз было в том году, когда вышел фильм «Левиафан» в России. Он довольно такой громкий был про, ну, в художественных кругах и вообще. И мы решили вот.
I can just say, and it happened just after the film Leviathan went, which was nominated to Oscar, was shown in Russia. So it was 2015, right? 2015, да?
И как раз вот эти соотношения, может, внешние какие-то, внешние информации соединились в одном образе.
Yeah, so there are some images from the film which inspired this this work, and also some other references to the history of the Vikings as well.
Ну и символично, что он построен из тех объектов, из тех досок старых, где-то от пристани, где-то от старых домов. То есть мы ничего не перевозили специально. Купили только материал, железо, чтобы это все крепко стояло. А так это весь материал с острова, именно старый, разрушенный такой, уже видавший виды.
Yeah, the materials which the artists used for making the sculpture were collected on this island. So they gathered the materials, the old wood around the island to create the sculpture.
Все нормально.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think we can just, do we have any more questions to the artists? Or do artists have questions to each other? Okay. I think we can just finalize. We sent several links and we will make a common email with the information about that. And I think that we will be in touch, because this was the second seminar where we tried to find the similarities between our regions and also in the colonization stories, which is a bit different in Russia. And I just would like to thank all the artists. Thanks for being able to show up today and share your work. And yes, and thanks Marek that he was with us even before his class in sculpture. Thank you, everyone. Thanks our colleagues and artists from Sitka. Thanks Ustina, Sergey and Alexander, and everyone else who joined us today. Thanks, Aaron. You started all this with your story. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.